Welcome to Writer. I'm William Slaughter, your host, and our guest today is Robert Bly. Robert Bly has been publishing his poems in America since 1962, when his first book, Silence in the Snowy Fields, appeared. We're going to be talking with Robert Bly today, principally about a book of poems called Morning Poems and a book called The Sibling Society. And welcome to Writer.
Thank you.
What I would be interested in hearing you talk some about is what you're up to just now. What events are current in your writing life?
Well, you know, since Bill Stafford died, I've taken up his practice, which was to write a poem every morning. So I still continue to do that, and I wrote a bad one this morning. So in general, my life continues to be to try to honor Bill by following that practice. But I'm also doing a book in prose with Marion Woodman together, and the subject would be something like this. If I and John talked about the young male in a male world, meeting the mentor in a male landscape, then this book will be the young male in a female landscape, especially the landscape of female anger. So it is a Russian fairy story that we'll be working on. So there's much more anger. The young males always pretend that there isn't any female anger. You know, I don't understand why women are so angry. So that it'll just move its way through there.
Yeah. In the work you've been doing in poetry of late, you just mentioned Bill Stafford. I know that you have adopted one of his writing habits, which is to write every day upon waking. And Morning Poems is made up, is it not, of poems done under those circumstances?
That's right.
One of the things,
in that plan, you don't get up until you've done your poem for the day.
You actually do write lying down in prone position.
Right.
Does that change the way your mind works?
Well, I don't know. Yes, I think so. For me, one of the things I've begun to realize is that I can't write a poem unless I feel safe. Now, maybe that is because my childhood with an alcoholic father was unsafe. I don't know, but I think it's true of everyone to some extent. But I have a place I can feel safe. It's early morning, and I get my own coffee, and I come, and I'm there, and I have some moments in which there's nothing I have to do, in which I can simply... In Silence in the Snowy Fields, you mentioned that. Those poems are written mainly outdoors. Silence in the Snowy Fields. I would sit under a tree, maybe for half an hour, until I felt something happened. And oftentimes the second stanza wouldn't come until something happened out in nature. Maybe a leaf fell or a crow came. And that was fine, I enjoyed that. But now I'm 70 or so, and there's so much in my head that I can begin a poem and it'll move on its own. I don't have to wait for leaves to fall. Bill Stafford used to say, you know, if you're 19 years old, you have plenty of material for the rest of your life to write poetry. So I like that. We're talking about the abundance of the memory, the abundance of...
You say that your writing has required of late a safe place, and that suggests to me the room in which you wrote the poems in Morning Poems, a room of Robert Bly's own, as it were. And I wonder if you might read for us the poem called Early Morning.
Which one is that?
Early Morning in Your Room. It's on page 3.
That's the first one in the book. So this is a poem exactly about that. It also, you know, I'm a Capricorn, and it also mentions melancholy. And there's this wonderful Anatomy of Melancholy by Robert Burton. And there were like 92 kinds of melancholy, and he had them all. And Kafka's letter to his father. Early morning in your room. It's morning. The brown scoops of coffee, the wasp-like coffee grinder, the neighbor still asleep. The gray light as you pour gleaming water. It seems you traveled years to get here. Finally, you deserve a house. If not deserve it, have it. No one can get you out. Misery had its way, poverty, no money at least, or maybe it was confusion. Anyway, that's over. Now you have a room. Those light-hearted books, The Anatomy of Melancholy, Kafka's Letter to His Father, are all here. You can dance with only one leg, or see the snowflake falling with only one eye. Even the blind man can see. That's what they say. And if you had a sad childhood, so what? As when Robert Burton said he was melancholy, he meant he was home.
I absolutely love the notion of being able to dance with only one leg and being blind, but being able to see. I would love to know more about the melancholy as home here. You talk a lot and write a lot about male grief.
Yeah.
And melancholy slides on over in my vocabulary to grief pretty easily. And, I think you talk about grief as a doorway to feelings.
That's true.
Is this melancholy the same kind of thing?
No, but I would say that's the first understanding I had, that I don't know about women. Women can move into feeling so easily, but for men it seemed to me that the door to the grief was the door to feeling. And a problem with corporation men is they really don't want to feel any grief. You can explain to them that the Amazon forests are disappearing. They don't want to feel it. You hear me what I say. It's a great tragedy that so many men in power don't want to feel any grief. So therefore I tried to feel grief not only about my father, but about a lot of other things that went on. And in the course of that, you often, you need therapy to get down often with grief. So I respect that. At the same time, there's a little bit of mischievous here against therapy. If you had a sad childhood, so what? In the end, you have to come to that.
Yes.
If you had a sad childhood, so what? When Robert Burton said he was melancholy, he meant he was home. Well, one of the things that influenced me was an incredible situation that happened in like the 15th and 16th centuries. There were a group of men and some women in Europe who corresponded with each other. Albert Dürer was one of them. The idea was melancholy is the royal road to God. It's a completely non-New Age idea. That there's something in melancholy which takes you out of all of this greed that we have, all of this New Age excitement. And for a time in Europe, you remember his wonderful print called Melancholy,
yes.
And it shows an angel, melancholy, sitting there like this, and they found out that the letters on the wall are a code for the day his mother died. So there is something marvelous about this idea, to regard melancholy as a positive thing. Not necessarily take Prozac to get rid of it either.
Yeah. Something you should own, not just own up to, but own, embrace it, make it your own rather than fend it off somehow with drugs or anything else.
And you have to make a distinction between grief on the one hand or terrible depression on the other. We're not talking about terrible depression. That's not a home. But there's some place in between melancholy. It's a home.
Yeah.
I like it. I like to be there now. It doesn't mean you can't laugh. You just...
Yeah.
You don't, it's...
Well, you can dance there, even if you had an unhappy childhood and only have one leg.
Well, that's what's interesting about this poem. When you start it in the morning, your mind is fresh, and you pick up something that's happened to you in a dream or otherwise, and you go, and Bill Stafford says, never make any decision about where the poem is going. You're open to everything that comes in. Well, that means you're in a little dance, in a way. That means you get inside your own mind and you begin to dance. And you're only dancing with one leg, we know that, because we're all crippled. But still, there's that feeling in the poem of a certain kind of happiness that comes from dancing.
You say somewhere, and it may be on the Stafford Bly, a literary friendship video, that when you wrote the poems in Silence in the Snowy Fields, there was a kind of envelope around you, around your psyche. And I'm wondering about that envelope in relationship to the poems you're writing now. Have you opened that envelope? Is that envelope still there? Are you out of it? I mean, I take it that envelope is another word that describes what you've described elsewhere as a husk or
It's also a safety. I mean, I went to college, the Navy, for a couple of years, and I went to college in Minnesota, then I went to Harvard. And I was one of the first students of Archibald MacLeish, and there are a lot of wonderful people there, including John Ashbery and Adrian Rich and others. But there was also a lot of verbal abuse, shall we say, in a high atmosphere like that. A lot of people will tell you you're stupid, and you probably are. So I didn't really begin to write poems that I put in Snowy Fields until I'd moved back to Minnesota and was living on a farm which my father had saved for me, because my grandmother told my father when I was 7, this kid is not going to be a farmer, so get that through your head. So he did, he saved this farm. So when I could go out there and sit in the same place I sat as a child, I felt safe. Is that right? Mm-hmm. I knew those trees. So those are two different kinds of safety. A safety you have outdoors when you're free from human verbal attacks. And then later, a safety you have in your own room when you've made enough money to have a house.
Could I get you to read Bad People, which
Sure.
is also in Morning Poems. It's on page 11, and it's one of my very favorite poems in the book.
So this came about from a friend named Martine Prechtel, who did a lot of work in the Mayan village for 13 years. And when I told him I'd had a dream of being chased through a tunnel by some bad people, one of the things he said was, well, I said, what does that mean to be chased by bad people? And he said, well, people like you and me, unless we're chased by someone, we'll never get to do anything. So I love that. A man told me once that all the bad people were needed. Maybe not all, but your fingernails you need, and they're really claws. And we know claws. And the sharks, what about them? Well, they make the other fish swim faster. Those hard-faced men in black coats who chase you for hours in dreams, that's the only way to get you to the shore. And sometimes those hard women who abandon us get you to say you. A lazy part of us is like a tumbleweed. It doesn't move on its own. Sometimes it takes a lot of depression to get tumbleweeds moving. And then they blow across 3 or 4 states. This man told me that things work together. Bad handwriting sometimes leads to new ideas. And the careless God, who refuses to let people eat from the tree of knowledge, can lead to books, and eventually to us. We write poems with lies in them, but they help a little.
There's so much going on in that poem that pulls me in. We could move from depression to, or melancholy to depression, I suppose, with a capital D, the depression, which is also depression. But I'm more interested just now in the bad handwriting.
Oh, yeah?
Bad handwriting can sometimes lead to new ideas. In terms of bad handwriting, whether that bad handwriting is metaphorical or literal as a writing technique or a way of getting at new materials, could you elaborate on that?
Well, you know, when I'm lying there in bed, obviously I'm not going to use a computer, and I'm not going to use a typewriter. You get crushed. So I write always by hand. And there's something about watching your own hand move, which is terrifically interesting. It reminds you you are one human being with a special bad handwriting, right? So there's some kind of self-esteem involved in a way in writing the poem in your own handwriting. And then things have happened to me. The one I remembered this morning was I was writing a poem and it said, we have pushed such and so farther and farther into the past. And I misread it when I was going to type it. And I thought it said father instead of farther. And then I said, whoa, that's exactly what I've done, pushed my father and mother into the past. That was one of the best lines in the poem, and it came completely accidentally through the bad handwriting. So I like that. That's one reason not to use a computer.
Wasn't it Rilke who said that poems are happy accidents, good poems?
Oh, did he say that?
The ones he kept were happy accidents.
Yeah.
And you are talking about accident as a move that the writer makes and has to be open and responsive to in his own writing.
Yeah, I love that.
There are several poems in Morning Poems that have to do with Wallace Stevens, and I'm interested in the last line of your Bad People poem. We write poems with lies in them, but they help a little, because it was Stevens, of course, who said, poems help me live my life. And here you have poems, whether they have lies in them, and I want to ask about what kinds of lies poems tell, especially your poems, if they do in fact tell lies, and what that little help is made of.
Well, I want to come back to Stevens too, but I was 48 years old or 49 before I mentioned my father in the poem at all. So therefore, I felt too much depression in a way hanging around the question of my father being a very good man, but also alcoholic. So the lies in Snowy Fields would be that I never mentioned him. I don't think I mentioned my mother either. Well, what kind of person is this who writes poems without referring to his parents? So the lies can be the absence of something, not mentioning something. So about that time, I began to say, no, I'm going to have to talk about my father. And finally, in the Man in the Black Coat Turns, I have one first poem to him, and then later I have a book with about 8 poems to my father when he's in the old people's home, and I'm sitting there talking to him. And all kinds of things come into my poems that were never there before. And they were very sad to me. But there's less lies in that book.
And you even in one of your poems attend your parents' wedding, don't you?
Yeah, I imagine my parents' wedding.
Of course. Right. I mean,
yeah, imagine my parents' wedding. And imagine my father not being able to feel the grief of that, as I probably would. You understand how that goes.
Yeah.
But what did you think about the Wallace Stevens ones?
Oh, I liked them very much, and I must confess that I was a bit surprised to have you choosing Stevens. I hadn't thought about that connection myself before. I hadn't made it, and your love of Stevens came as news to me, so I especially liked that.
Well, you see, one time, how strange these things are. You want an accident. I'm in North Dakota. I'm out of college a couple of years. I'm very sad. I don't know what the hell I'm going to do with anything, how I'm going to earn a living or anything. I go into a cafe in North Dakota. They have 2 books for sale. One of them is a book of Wallace Stevens. How that got into a cafe, I'll never know. But I bought that, and I love him, and he's been a guide to me. So let's do one Stevens poem.
Which one?
Well, we could take this first one, Rethinking Wallace Stevens. Wallace Stevens is a genius many times over, but he's got this fashionable idea, which was very popular in the 20s, that God is dead. And that's a crazy idea. I mean, we've all read enough Jung to know that these images are going to be with us forever and ever and ever. So I tried to meditate, how could Wallace Stevens be so unbelievably intelligent and then have this really sad old Marxist idea that God is dead? So here's one poem, Rethinking Wallace Stevens. What can I say? You have this funny idea that the gods are dead. You were so rash. I'd play saying the gods have died, but I'd never say it. If they're gone, only imagination, that's capitalized. If they're gone, only imagination can replace them. That's you. We'll have to come to you, where you stand in your Hartford garden, lolling and longing and looking like a girl in a white dress. Well, it's sort of mischievous.
Yeah, I love it. One of the Stevens lines that I think of repeatedly as I read your work is the last line from the Sunday morning poem, Downward to Darkness
in extended wings.
wings.
Great,
you know, the
great.
casual flock of pigeons makes ambiguous undulations as they sink downward to darkness on extended wings. And there is so much going down in your poems, and the confrontation with darkness somehow. Maybe it's a strange kind of move to make, but I'd like to go, Stevens, Downward to Darkness on Extended Wings, to your phrase, vertical passion in the Sibling Society, which you note the absence of in our culture.
Okay. When I was thinking about the Sibling Society, this kind of society we have now, with this tremendous hatred of anyone in the past, the tremendous hatred of Winston Churchill, and pretty soon it'll be Abraham Lincoln, and Columbus is evil, you know, all of this. It's very strange because one of the motions when you go to the, it's vertical to go upward to God, but it's also vertical to go back to your grandfather, grandmother, great-grandmother, and into the past. That's also a vertical line. So you can call it an adolescent society, but another thing you can call it is a horizontal society, in which the movement upward towards God or towards the ancestors are gone, and the movement downward, which is where Dostoevsky liked to go, to the demons, is gone too. And all you have is Letterman all the way, right? So therefore the children are really starving to death from a lack of the vertical passion, the vertical intensity. And St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa, whoa, the vertical energy is so incredible. So I'm just saying that it's a very odd thing that democracy should end up as something horizontal. What were you thinking in relation to you mentioned Antonio Machado, the Spanish poet who said, how does he begin that poem?
4 things mankind owns.
Mankind owns 4 things that are no good at sea. Rudder, that'd be on the sailing ship. Rudder, anchor, oars, and the fear of going down. Well, we're back again to the corporate men and women who don't want to go down.
Exactly.
Who don't want to go down into their own suffering or their own inadequacy or the grief of the whole planet. There's a feeling now that the whole planet is in grief. The whole planet is in grief. It is no longer joyful as it was in the 18th century. The whole planet is in grief. And somehow we have to learn to go down if we're going to get near reality at all.
You also mentioned, and it seems to me connected with the descent, the going down, and the fear of going down. You mentioned in the Sibling Society that America has, in a very real sense, colonized itself. When colonial administrators make the move into a tribal society, one of the first things they try to do is tell the indigenous culture, convince it that nothing works. And you suggest that that is more or less what has happened here.
Yes, that was the last idea I had when I was writing Sibling Society, and to me it was the most frightening. Just to go over it again, what happens when England goes to India and they're going to colonize India? The first thing they do is to get rid of the elder system, tell them all their elders are finished, and they get rid of their vertical system, tell them that their gods are all nothing and they all have to become Episcopalians. Well, what happened when we came to this country and found the Native Americans here? The first thing we did is to destroy their elder system. And if they had, we appointed new chiefs. And if they had a chief like Crazy Horse who was great, we just killed him. Put a knife in his side. Second thing we did was to tell them that their vertical system was completely wrong. All this stuff about walk on, talk on. They all had to become Baptists. So we sent them to those Indian schools in South Dakota where they are not allowed to speak one word of their native language, because with the Native Americans, the whole religion is contained in every word. So the frightening thing is that that's actually what we've done to our own people now. That when you look at young children now, children 14 to 20, with their incredible depression and sadness and loss, and you're looking at kids in a boarding school, Indian boarding school in 1890 in South Dakota. A lot of these younger ones have no feeling at all for gods or vertical at all, and they don't have any elders. The elders have been sent to Phoenix or to Florida. So that's very sad to me. I put it that we're the first culture in the world that's ever colonized its own people. So the question is, what do you do about that?
Yeah, how do you heal such a
Well,
people?
if you're going to reverse it, the first thing you have to do is get the elders back. That means we've got to get our elders, our grandparents, back from Florida and Phoenix. We have to go back there and say to these grandfathers and grandmothers, listen, we need you. We need you back up there where it's cold. We need you to take care of the children, because no one is taking care of the children. Both the father and the mother working, sometimes because they can't do anything else. They have to work. But the children are the ones who are suffering the most in the Sibling Society. And that's why women have been automatically really sympathetic to the Sibling Society, because they know it isn't about men or women, it's about children. So we need to, and that means that for the young men, for example, what they need are older elders if their fathers are not there. We have to understand that you can find an elder, a good one, and it will act as a father. What is it? 85% of young men in prison have no father. And there's a lot of girls now, you know, the crimes are rising very fast among young girls. So you need to find female elders for them who can replace the missing mother. And then the second thing is necessary is to try to do what the Native Americans have done, which is to hold on to their own religious system, no matter what the honkies want them to do. in India. They keep their Hindu religion and their gods very powerful. So how can we do that? How can we keep our own vertical gods and Christianity alive?
If a young writer wants to put his or her work in the service of that kind of hopeful future now, how can we heal ourselves? How can something good come out of all of this, out of the colonized society? What would you recommend? How does one go about using the kinds of things we're talking about in the work?
Well, you know, I think people like Gary Snyder have said things like that. You know, Gary has a very fine and intricate mind. He could have been great in the corporations. Instead of that, he goes to Japan and he learns something about Buddhism. So therefore, each individual now has to go alone for a while and find out where that vertical life in himself or herself is. And secondly, I think they have to learn what an elder is and to whom they wish to be an elder. All of this friendship between younger poets and older poets is a wonderful thing. Those are not very good answers for you, but we're not going to get much out of the big society now because even the Episcopal priests are turning into Unitarians. So somehow it has to be found separately.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's more than an acceptable answer, and I think that what you're doing with your own work and with your own gatherings and performances is modeling just the kind of thing that some of the younger people ought to be aspiring toward, functioning as an elder, if you will, in the culture, replacing guilt with responsibility. I think you say somewhere.
Well, somebody said, you know, why are you writing these books like I and John in Sibling Society? And I say, well, my view of a poet is more the European one, that simply being a poet does not excuse you from taking part in a national debate. So I've taken part in 3 national debates. One was the question whether the Vietnam War is valuable or not. Second one, whether the men are the source of all evil. And thirdly, this question of the sibling society, can we live in a society so utterly horizontal as this one without dying spiritually? So that's what I've tried to do.
Thank you for being with us, Robert Bly,
Thank you, William.
and thank you for joining us.